Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to this week's real estate deal breakdown. I am your host, Greg. If you're not familiar with me, I've done at this point almost 500 properties in pretty expensive, high-end competitive markets. So everything you're going to hear from me is real information, real deals with closing statements and HUDs. This is from the trenches. This is not regurgitated theory out of a book. So if you get value from this and you're watching, if you could subscribe to my channel and like the video, that'd be great. So today we're going to talk about a property that just closed yesterday in Pierce County, Washington. It was in the city of Puyallup, which is near Tacoma. So this property was in an area that I wasn't too fond of in terms of the actual location of the building. So I'm actually going to talk to you about how I wholesaled the property, and the deal ended up coming from a real estate agent, and the real estate agent was on my buyer's list. So basically, I got a lead from my buyer's list that was a real estate agent, and they brought me this deal for me to be the fix and flip buyer on it. But after I walked the property, I realized it really wasn't for me. And I'm going to tell you how I ended up turning that into a $20,000 wholesale deal. So the cost of acquisition was a big fat $0. So first things first, just to give you a little context on the property, it was in a location which I wasn't a big fan of because the house was basically right behind a busy intersection, right adjacent to like an industrial building. So the house wasn't really in a residential neighborhood. And I just knew, like, with what I like to do when I buy and sell houses, I like having similar comps right next door to each other. So it's really easy to figure out the value, right? Instead of being like, well, it might sell for this, but I don't really know. So I wasn't a big fan of that in terms of resale value, in terms of what I was going to do with the house. Now, the buyer is obviously doing something different, which is how we ended up getting the deal to work out. So I ended up getting this email from this realtor who was on my buyer's list. I didn't even know her before, but she emailed me out of the blue. Originally, the seller wanted like a crazy price. And I said, hey, that's never going to work. Nobody's going to pay that price. It's just not going to work out. So then about 3 months later, she emailed me saying, hey, if the seller's flexible on the price, would you still be interested? And I said, maybe. I said, I want to see the property. I want to meet you. I want to see what we're looking at. So I ended up going there, and the property was exactly what I thought. It was in a weird location, and I just really wasn't the biggest fan of that. So I said, hey, this is probably not for me. She's like, well, is there anything you could do? And I'm like, well, I don't know if you guys would even go for this, but what if I just wholesaled it? Because she was on my buyer's list, right? So she obviously knows that I wholesale. And she's like, okay, well, can you kind of explain that a little bit more? I said, well, listen, if this is the price your seller wants, I can give you guys an offer for that price. Just before we go forward, though, I want to just disclose to you that my intention, if I gave you that price, because I personally don't like the location, is I'm going to go out and I'm going to probably assign this to another buyer and make an assignment fee. So basically, if the deal works out, your client's going to get the price she wants. You're going to get your commission from the client. I'm going to make an assignment fee and the deal will get done, right? If the deal doesn't work out, I'm going to have like a 5-day inspection wholesale period in here. And, if I don't get a buyer in 5 days, then it is what it is. We're going to rip up the contract and go our separate ways. She said, that's fine. Let me explain it to my client. The seller of the property was fine with that because they were going to ultimately get the number they wanted if it worked out. So we signed an agreement. I put it out to the buyer's list. Within about 6 hours, it was sold to my buddy Wally, who actually lives right down the street from me in West Seattle. And he's like, hey, I like the deal. I want to do it. He ended up being the most competitive offer because he offered me sight unseen. He actually went there because it was hard to get inside because the tenants were there. He went there with a drone because he's an absolute ninja. He got a drone shot of the entire property, which was a huge lot with another detached structure in the back. And he's like, hey, I'll take this sight unseen. You don't have to worry about it. So I assigned the property over to him. I had it in contract with the seller for $320. Yeah, it was $320. And I assigned it to Wally for $340. So that's a $20,000 assignment fee. How are you? And the funny thing is about this is on paper, it was a $20,000 assignment fee, but that's the equivalent of me making a $30,000 assignment fee because this deal had a zero cost per marketing or cost per acquisition because there was no marketing involved. There was a referral. So that was basically just as good as making a regular $30,000 deal that we do because normally it costs us about 10 grand in marketing in Seattle. So he said he'll take it. He put the earnest money in right away. The deal ended up closing, no issues. The tenants got out early, and the seller got the money they wanted. The agent got her commission. I got my wholesale fee. The buyer got a property that he's going to make a good amount of money on because what I think he's going to do is he's going to subdivide up the lots because it's a big parcel. So he'll probably be able to get, I don't know, 2 or 3 different lots out of that, which is cool. And, maybe that's something I'll do in the future. But at this point, I like to stick to what I know, and that's just buying and selling houses at a discount. So that's the property in Puyallup. It worked out. What are some lessons that you can take from this that you can apply in your business? Well, lesson number 1 is simple. Referrals are usually the best deals you can get, right? Because people already know you, they already see you, they already have familiarity with you. So when you can get referral leads, that is usually the best type of lead, better than SEO, better than mail, better than Google PPC, because they already kind of know who you are and they're practically pre-sold at that point if they're coming in off a referral. And I would say at this point about 30 to 50% of our probably like 30 to 40% of our business is referral based, which is awesome. Whether that's real estate agents or wholesalers or sellers of sellers. So referrals are probably the hottest leads you can get. And how do you get referrals? Well, you do the right thing. You show that you're out there in the marketplace buying and selling. You deliver on your promises. You promote yourself. You lead with value. And when you do that consistently, you put out content like this. By the way, if you have a house you want to wholesale to me or wholesale with me in Washington, New York, or Delaware, send me an email, Greg at Velocity House Buyers. That's how we get referrals too. So lesson number one, referrals are the best you can get for the most part. Lesson number two here, be transparent when you're wholesaling, right? I knew that it was a deal. It just wasn't a deal for me. But just because it wasn't a deal for me doesn't mean it's not a deal for somebody else. So I knew as long as I could communicate the wholesale option to the realtor and her client, I knew there was a pretty good chance they were going to go for it because ultimately they had nothing to lose. They had to wait 5 days for me to find a buyer. I ended up finding a buyer in an hour or 2 hours. So, I mean, it's a no-brainer. So, don't throw your leads away if they're not for you. Try to wholesale them. Obviously, if you wholesale them, you want to communicate how you're wholesaling it in a above board way. You don't want to lie to people. You don't want to say, "Oh yeah, it's a done deal at 320," and then let's say you can't find a buyer and then you got to go back and cancel. You look like a clown, and then you'll never get a referral from them again. So understand that if you're going to be wholesaling referrals, you have to communicate that on the front end and make sure that this person you're transacting with is okay with that. So that's lesson number two. And then lesson number three is that, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So just because I didn't like this specific property for the exit strategy that I was planning to do, which was a fix up and flip, doesn't mean somebody else sees something completely different, which, another way to monetize the property, which allows it to be a deal, right? So if I was like, oh, I'm only fix and flipping this house, or I'm only going to buy and relist this house, like I wouldn't have been able to monetize it. But because I knew that it was still in a good enough area to where someone would probably pay 340 for a house in Puyallup, which is cheap. I knew someone else would want to take it, and I didn't even think about subdividing lots, and I wouldn't have even done that because I don't do that right now, right? But I knew somebody else would. So the better you have of a network in your local jurisdiction, or if you're national, the better pool of buyers you have, the more opportunities you're going to have to monetize properties. So that's the property in Puyallup. I hope you got value from this. Once again, if you're in the Seattle Metro or the Hudson Valley or the state of Delaware, you have a house you want to wholesale to me, send me an email, Greg at velocityhousebuyers.com, or a DM on Instagram at Grego37, and I'll see you on the next REI deal breakdown. Take care.